One of the greatest searches that we have in this, especially if you are what I call phishing. So in other words, I don't know exactly what I'm looking for. I just want to know, is there anything out there that's a little bizarre and I'd like to know about it? We have a process called indicators. And specifically, there is one called indicator category. Indicator category is one of those wonderful enum types that if I click on the equal sign and then I hit tab, it gives me a very specific list of all the different types of indicators of compromise. And I can search for each of these inside my network. Now, some of these are more chatty than others, and we'll talk about that, but this is a fantastic way to go and look for things that happened on our network. One of my favorites is persistence. Not many things create persistence. You either know that you installed it or you were unaware that something like that created persistence. And as you can see on ours, only 25 things have created persistence. And most of these are the OneDrive setup that we've got going on down here. We got a couple of PowerShell ones that look a little bizarre. And if we look across the thing here, we can see that MS settings shell open command, whatever that is. I don't know what that is. I would certainly want to check that out to figure out why that was creating persistence on my system. But as you can see, just because it's an indicator of compromise doesn't mean that it is necessarily evil. There's nothing wrong with OneDrive doing things and creating persistence for itself, but we log it as this is something that could be malicious. And what's nice is these are all actions that are based off of MITRE expectations. If we go over here and we look, actually, if I click on indicators, it'll give me a better look. Just real quick, notice this is a good place to look at this. When I click on all events, it has the attributes area. In the attributes area, give me the variables and the fields that are specific to an individual attribute. So in other words, since this is an indicator attribute, since this is an indicator object, these are the attributes that are specific to indicator. If I then click on indicators themselves, that field that showed all those different indicators now becomes individual fields in the record. But as you can see, it gives you the T numbers of the various MITRE articles regarding this. Now, in this case, it's almost always going to be the same because we're talking about persistence. But more interestingly, we have here indicator metadata, service name, PSE, exec, and service name HZJBTE. I don't know what that is. I would want to look that up. But as you can see, the rest of these are pretty standard. Most of the time when programs create persistence that are legitimate, they have no trouble telling you what happened, when they did it, how they did it, why they did it, and that whole 9 yards. When you start seeing some more bizarre things like this, then you might want to start checking it out. Again, remember, all you got to do is go back here, find the source process storyline ID, and you can open it up and check out everything that happened. Now, since this is one of those wonderful the indicator category is one of those wonderful enum types, you could go this route, where I create one query that looks up all the different indicators of compromise. And this isn't a terrible thing to do, and in a case where you're looking at a very short time frame, or you could limit this to one machine or something like that, then you will have a reasonable number of indicators that you can look through. The problem, of course, with this is, as you'll see momentarily, many of these get to be very chatty, especially things like, if we come over here to the indicators, And we look at, well, post-exploitation is a good one, but uses penetration framework is all it says. If we come down here, as you can see, post-exploitation can be pretty chatty. Now, in this case, then it was because we were utilizing a framework. But things like evasion, sometimes general. I mean, this is going to be very general. A user logged in. Well, okay. I mean, that's great, but not the most amazing thing in the world. Privilege escalation, on the other hand, attempts to bypass the UAC. Yeah, we're going to want to check that out to see what's going on there. So if I were to get rid of the post-exploitation, just because there's so many of them, we're going to clear post-exploitation just so that we don't have those anymore. Another one you'll find that happens a lot is evasion. This is going to be all about adding rules to get rid of things. Now, this actually can be a legitimate process across the board. Again, though, what you're looking for is what's adding these. So we come over here and we say, well, what process is adding those exceptions? And then we come back here and say, what's the system process? Setup.exe. Well, what are we setting up? And so you might want to check out that a little bit further. Setup.exe comes from Microsoft Edge. Well, in this case, probably not a problem. You know, we're going to see it's adding firewall exceptions. It's the command line was Microsoft Edge update. So not a big deal. However, it did do something that was at least interesting on the outside. Again, moving down through another persistence one. Like I said, I like persistence. Exploitation can be a little nondescript, but it does give you things like documents are behaving strangely and when shell code gets executed. And that can be an indicator that you want to go look at each one of these things, but it also could be nondescript. Let's see. Scrolling on down through. Info stealer. This is going to be all about when you try to grab information that is necessary for identifying users or anything like that. It's part of our attack. I grabbed the SAM database, and that's when these were triggered. And that would be a valid hit. And of course, we'd want to look at what's going on here. More privilege escalation. Ransomware, obviously, since it behaves like ransomware, since it recognizes the fact that it starts encrypting things. So let's get rid of a couple more. So we've looked at the privilege escalation. We've talked about persistence. We've talked about ransomware, so we'll just get rid of those. We've talked about info stealer. So I'm just eliminating ones we've already talked about. So evasion, this can be not all the time useful because it talks about indirect commands. These happen on a regular basis, though, so a lot of processes do this, and you just don't have to do it. Injection, a very good one here, but you have to be careful with it because code injection has become far more mainstream than it used to be. Now, in this particular case, this injection is odd. However, you'd have to look at the individual instance of the injection to identify that this particular thing is odd. But code injection happens a lot. If you actually use many browsers today, the various tabs will get code injection all the time. So you may need to go in and start eliminating source processes that you know commonly use injection as part of their everyday operation. Exploitation, again, more shellcode things. And I think we're about at the end of these. So we talked about injection, we talked about general, exploitation, evasion. Yeah. So the big deal here is you can do what I did with this indicator category and show all of them. And of course, it'll give you every instance of something that even looks minorly suspicious. And because we are looking very squarely at a Metasploit attack, then there's a lot of examples of bad processes happening here. In real life, some of these get to be way more chatty, but some of them are really, really good. Injection can be interesting, but you might get a lot of stuff. I really like persistence. I really like privilege escalation. And I really like usually hiding stealthiness or info stealer, because they will give you some really oddball things that that don't happen on a regular basis. The long and the short of it is, if you are fishing for malicious activity on your network and you don't know what you're really looking for, this is a very good place to start. Just because you have an indicator category does not mean that you have risen to the level that's required for either malicious or suspicious activity, because, like I actually said already, some of these things are fairly normal on a network. So we note them and we allow you to search them, but we're going to leave it up to you to decide whether or not this is a good instance of an indicator or a bad instance of an indicator. But like I said, this is a great place to just go out and do a search.